Hello, Rochester. What a joy and a privilege to be with you this morning. That was a fun story, right? I like the main character, Nasruddin. Clever, bold, kind of sassy. And we're meant to take his side, right? To not judge people by their appearance, certainly not over their character. And of course, UUs have a proud history of welcoming in those who have been cast out and excluded from other circles. What might we learn from looking at this story from the other perspective? When I listened to the story of the hungry coat, I found myself empathizing with the host of the banquet. I might wrinkle my nose too if someone came to my special fancy dinner party smelling like manure and tracking dirt all over my rugs. Mullah Nasruddin was so focused on his own pleasure, the delicious food, that he did not take time to make himself presentable, even though he clearly could have, because he eventually does go and change and comes back and the party's still going on. This story is useful and humorous because we can see how neither side is really behaving well. Nasruddin interprets the body language of the others at the banquet, but no one there actually talks to him about whether or not he's welcome or whether or not he smells bad. And Mullah Nasruddin, in all his wisdom, actually doesn't do a whole lot better. He doesn't talk to any of his friends or community members directly about his feelings. He communicates indirectly by feeding his coat and being snarky, saying his coat is obviously the real guest. The story ends in what feels like a cliffhanger. Do they finally talk directly? Or do both sides feel offended? Are both sides humble and accountable? Do they repair their relationship? Or does this offense and indirect communication result in a serious rift in the community? Perhaps you have had an interaction like that one, in which you cannot believe how insensitive and unkind the other person is being, yet they feel the same way about you, and you're both hurt and baffled. It's not easy to see things from another person's perspective, especially when to do so might show you that you were in the wrong. I think one of the hardest parts of listening to someone whose perspective is really different from ours is when the rightness of our perspective is linked to our identity. In an us versus them scenario, the problem is not only in how we perceive and define the them, it's also in how we perceive and define us. It's easy to love your neighbor if your neighbor looks and talks and votes the same way you do. And it's easy to widen our circle of concern to include people who already match our circle's established identity. It takes considerable effort and real intention to expand our definition of who we are. We know that diversity makes us stronger, but if you're not used to diverse spaces, diversity can be uncomfortable. That's why beloved community is so great to talk about, but hasn't happened yet. There's a really great example of this in the Gospel of Matthew. Come with me, UUs. We are visiting the Bible this morning. Like any good story, the story of Jesus is told from many different perspectives. In the Gospel of Matthew, I see Jesus having some serious character development. He listens to someone he considers an other. She totally schools him, and then he widens his circle of concern and expands his understanding of himself. As you know, Jesus was a Jew. Judaism was a little different back then, but being Jewish was central to Jesus' self-identity because he believed he was the Messiah of whom the Jewish prophets had foretold. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, Jesus says, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill." Jesus picks his 12 apostles. They follow him around wherever he travels. He's curing diseases. He's healing the injured. He's driving out evil spirits and demons. He even brought a little girl back from the dead. But there's just so much suffering in the world. So in chapter 10 of Matthew, he gives his apostles these powers too. To cast out unclean spirits, cure every disease and sickness, but he tells them, just stick to the Jews. Matthew chapter 10, verse 5 and 6, it says, "These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no house of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." So they go out and do that. Skip ahead to chapter 15. Verse 21, the crew's all back together. They're walking along, and this woman, who is a Canaanite woman, not a Jew, the Bible doesn't give her a name, so we'll just call her the Canaanite woman, she asks Jesus and his apostles for help. She calls him Lord. She says, "Have mercy on me. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But Jesus sees her as an other so strongly that at first he straight up ignores her. His disciples say, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." So Jesus turns to this woman and says, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Jesus is refusing to help her because to do so is outside the bounds of his own self-identity as the Jewish Messiah. And I think because his identity is threatened, he gets a little mean. He even compares her to a dog. But this Canaanite woman is not intimidated. She has a sick child at home and will not take no for an answer. And moreover, she believes that Jesus can and will help her because she has faith in the relationship between herself as a person of worth and dignity and a God who is a loving and merciful God, who in this book is personified as Jesus. And Jesus listens. Verse 28, "Then Jesus answered her, 'Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish.' And her daughter was healed instantly." Then Jesus goes out and heals whole crowds of people. The Gospel of Matthew is not specific about whether or not they were all Jews, but at the very end, after Jesus is killed and he comes back from the dead, in the last chapter, he tells his apostles, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." Jesus is no longer only concerned about the nation of Israel. He's welcoming the other into his circle of concern. Now, a note about this last passage I reference, it does have an ugly past. It's been used as justification for countless crimes against humanity, including kidnapping children, torture, multiple cultural genocides that have destroyed millions of people's lives and wiped out entire civilizations. That is not the interpretation I support. I believe this was originally a statement of diversity and not forced conformity. Jesus is telling his apostles if non-Jews want to join us, they are welcome. We, as modern UUs, aim for an ever-widening circle of care. It's right there in our principles. Our first principle, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Our third principle, we promote the acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. So, who do you think of as other from you? Really take a moment to think about it. Picture them in your mind. Who's the other? It's so hard to extend loving kindness to those people when society says we belong to different groups and we're not even supposed to respect each other, let alone agree on anything. Some days I can pray for Putin and send loving kindness to the transphobic lawmakers in Florida and Texas, and some days my heart is too broken and I can't. But I try. That's why we gather in communities like this one. This is where we practice, in our home church. We practice messing up with each other. We practice being accountable with each other. Practice forgiving each other. Here is where we practice getting uncomfortable. We build our self-love, our faith, and our trust in humanity. I've traveled all over this country and found allies in the most unexpected places. This guy in Wyoming with a gun rack on his gigantic truck and a bumper sticker that says, "I support PETA, people eating tasty animals." He still helps me pull my little Prius with its gay bumper stickers out of the mud. People are more complicated than the boxes we put them in. Loving the other requires genuine interest in the well-being of those who are supposedly our enemies, like that care that truck driver showed me. Genuine interest in the well-being of those who are supposedly our enemies. It takes a bold spirit and a strong faith to speak truth to power, as the Canaanite woman did in the Gospel of Matthew. It also takes a courageous spirit to set aside what we think we know and really listen to another person's perspective, as Jesus did with the Canaanite woman. And like Jesus, we can allow what we learn to expand our understanding not just of the world, but of ourselves. Loving your neighbor requires self-love. And a strong sense of self-love is wonderful and important and powerful and must be balanced by flexibility of ego, so that when we get new information, we can grow instead of being threatened by it. This combination of strong but flexible self-love is what allows us to really listen and love the other. In this church, in our faith, we say, yes, this work is hard, but yes, I'm with you in it. Let's do this work together. Because yes, it is so worth it. Because we believe when we can love even our enemies, this will lead to peace, justice, and human flourishing. To love the other and ourselves, to proclaim we are all worthy and deserving of love and belonging to the human family. I'll leave you with this last quote from John O'Donohue. Since the birth of the human heart is an ongoing process, love is the continuous birth of creativity within and between us. May it be so.